I recently watched Joker and didn't really care for it. If you're interested in why, click the link below. But, more importantly, making that video gave me an idea. Instead of Joker, why not talk about a good movie? Why not talk about a great movie? In fact, why not talk about the best movie ever made? Martin Scorsese's 1982 classic, The King of Comedy. It begins with a late-night talk show host, Jerry Langford, fighting his way towards a limousine, only to find that one of the usual suspects has already snuck inside. Another fan helps by taking the woman's place, and because it is easier to handle one psycho than 50, the beleaguered star tells the chauffeur to start driving. The youngish man introduces himself as Rupert Pupkin, an aspiring comic who sees Langford as a role model and desperately wants to be a guest on his show. With the patience of a saint, Langford tries to explain how the industry works and what a plausible career path would look like, only to have Rupert press the issue, making it difficult to leave. So, out of pure desperation, he says to go apply for a spot at the office, not realizing that Pupkin has smelled blood, and this situation is now out of control. What follows is a series of escalatingly desperate attempts to leverage this interaction into a TV appearance, culminating in an outright hostage situation, with Rupert giving the station execs a choice between letting him perform or never seeing Jerry again. The film's roster of characters is limited, but perfectly cast. The woman hiding in the limo is later revealed to be Masha, a fellow superfan and Rupert's partner in crime, played by Sandra Bernhard, a lovely woman who is preternaturally hideous once she gets in character. There's also Rita, our hero's high school crush and reluctant love interest, played by De Niro's then-wife Diane Abbott. Beyond that, the film is peppered with one-scene wonders who don't stay too long but deliver some excellent quips while fleshing out the leads and their relationship, which is the driving force behind this movie. If you're my age or younger, you've probably spent your life watching Robert De Niro push out a series of increasingly lazy family films. But there was a time when he was unmatched at portraying intense, slightly insane men on the fringe of society. And this movie is the one shining moment when a director found a way to use that typecast as the vehicle for a viciously funny comedy. Made all the funnier by pairing him with Jerry Lewis, who brought a wealth of experience to the production, knowing how to play an elder statesman of comedy by merit of actually being one. These two have incredible chemistry, in spite of the fact that their characters get very little screen time together. This is partially overcame through Rupert's fantasy sequences, which shows an idealized vision of the two men having a very convincing male friendship. But, even more than that, their dynamic shines through because the idea of each man casts a long shadow over the other's life. To Pupkin, Jerry is the gatekeeper of fame, the only force capable of salvaging his failed existence. And Langford's daily routine is defined by the paradox of living in a world which loves him, but absolutely does not have his best interests at heart, of which Rupert is the final boss. When he's off stage, Jerry is not especially warm or inviting, but comes off as a very reasonable, polite man who just wants to quietly go about his business, but can't leave his apartment without being mobbed by fans, who are usually friendly but do not appreciate how often he has these interactions, although some are just openly abusive, the most memorable of which being this.
Please, Clark, would you just please say something to my nephew Morris on the phone? He's in the hospital.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
You should only get cancer. I hope you get cancer.
Fun fact, that scene was added at Lewis's request. It actually happened to him. Langford has a lot of material comforts, but rather than luxuries to be enjoyed, they seem like necessary defenses if he's going to have the slightest sense of normalcy. And, of course, the effect he has on others is so huge that he gets drafted into parasocial relationships with borderline people. Like Masha, who uses her obsession with Jerry to cope with her neglectful upbringing. Or Rupert, who's just an asshole. With such a bleak depiction of celebrity life, you'd be forgiven for asking why he even bothers. And the answer we're ultimately given is that the man simply loves what he does. Langford is a true artist who cares about the people he works with and has a burning desire to put on a good show. He performs because he has to. The fame is a byproduct, and one he has very mixed feelings about. But that raises the question, if someone was not in love with the process, then why on earth would they want this life? What kind of psychopath would see celebrity as a goal in and of itself? Rupert Pupkin is the embodiment of obsession. deeply dissatisfied with life and consumed by the idea that all his problems have both a common source and a single solution. During his initial meeting with Jerry, Rupert mentions that he was watching when the comedian finally got his big break, filling in for Jack Parr when the host suddenly turned ill. The fact that Langford was only in that position because he'd spent years grinding as a stand-up doesn't even enter Pupkin's field of view. And in a weird way, he's right to ignore that. Deeply insecure about his age, Pupkin is 34 years old, and as the movie goes along, it becomes clear that on some level this entire scheme is a way to win Rita's affection. And unless he wants to get with her in his late 40s, he better come up with a quick solution. Yes, Rupert really should have thought of that 10 years ago, but that doesn't change his current situation, and if he was a decent human being, we wouldn't be here in the first place, so Jerry filled in for Parr, Jerry became famous, and that little note of cause and effect is the only chance at salvation. And if it's connected to other circumstances which logically do need to be there, well, that's reality's problem. Because of this disconnect, Pupkin ends up constantly invoking an idealized vision of his narrative which he has zero interest in actually upholding. His fantasy self is a sober, rational person who sees fame as a burden and wishes it was easier to take time for his personal life. He also tries to manipulate Langford by invoking the idea that, underneath it all, he's just a regular person, often while ignoring the human right in front of him who is both clearly suffering and realizing that, actually yes, he is capable of murder. And weirdest of all, his assumption that fame is how to get attention from women makes him miss opportunities to do so. Rita seemed pretty impressed with Rupert before he tried to dazzle her with his flimsy connection with Jerry. The closest Pupkin ever gets to sincerity is in his bizarre codependent relationship with Masha, whose delusions are just similar enough to be compatible. It really is a case of the blind leading the blind, where they constantly bicker about the details of each other's plans while politely ignoring the fact that they are based in utter nonsense. One will goad the other into action, and because the plan was predicated on bad information, it won't work. But nothing they do ever works, so it really doesn't matter. The single-mindedness also gives Pupkin a really distorted view of risk and reward. He must perform on Jerry's show. Nothing else matters. So, even if his best plan has a 1% chance of success, he has to treat it as an absolute certainty. Which ties into what makes Pupkin so uniquely terrifying as a character, his ability to weaponize delusion. It's not that Rupert has suffered a total break with reality, although he certainly has his moments, but instead he actively reinvents it as he goes along, believing in whatever set of facts will justify his current scheme and make prior failures compatible with the larger narrative. If you haven't realized yet, this movie is a cringe comedy, taking that concept to its final, perfect form. It's not just that Pupkin is cringe, it's that Pupkin is cringe. He's doing it on purpose. Rupert's signature move is stretching the social contract to its absolute breaking point, creating a situation where the other party has to either give him what he wants or deal with levels of awkwardness so intense that they would somehow feel contaminated. A behavior which reaches its peak in a scene which is legitimately hard to watch. Rupert's attempts to reach Jerry at work have failed horribly, but in the process he has recorded his routine. So naturally, he has a fantasy chat with Jerry who insists that Rupert come to his country home for a work session, and to bring Rita with him. Pupkin reluctantly agrees, and a few days later shows up in real life, letting himself in and making small talk with the staff while waiting for Jerry to get back from the golf course. Everything works out, and that's the end of the movie. I've loved The King of Comedy for years, but as I've grown older and gotten into YouTube, it keeps taking on more and more meaning. What really got me this time was Langford's primer on how to get in the show business. The need to start at the bottom, get experience, rank up, and move on to tougher levels as you outgrow your current one. Maybe I'm alone on this, but fuck, that sounds nice. There used to be a way to do things. The internet has allowed for an explosion of creativity and niche content, but it's also destroyed any sense of stability or legitimate authority within the world of entertainment. Back in the day, there were places an aspiring artist could go where older, more experienced people could tell them how to spend their time. As opposed to the internet, where, against all logic, it's the people who stay the same and institutions which constantly replace each other. The collapse of hierarchy has also removed all quality controls. The old system wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bullshit either. And for every misunderstood genius who was unfairly turned away, there were probably 500 narcissists who were politely, yet firmly, told to go die in the gutter somewhere. After all, the George Carlins of this world can strike out on their own and build a new system, while the Pupkins will have to either wise up or kill themselves. Or maybe not. Delusional artists are nothing new, but it used to be limited in time and place, because they only knew so many people and most normies would not tolerate their nonsense. If they wanted more attention, they had to actually perform, exposing themselves to reality and serious criticism. With the advent of social media, it's now possible to receive constant validation for an artistic identity which is wildly out of step with its role in your life. It's tempting to imagine Pupkin getting access to Twitter, but we don't fucking have to. This behavior is just normal now. And even more than the old system, this movie makes me nostalgic for a saner conception of what the industry was. The dignity of the celebrity was in the knowledge that fame was part of their job. It wasn't who they were, it was what they did, a byproduct of extreme achievement within a profession. The film makes no attempt to hide Langford's wealth because back then, entertainers got rich for being entertaining, so them having money carried less of a stigma. The old school late nights were never on the cutting edge, but there's no denying that they had some serious skills, because anyone who didn't would have been crushed by the pressure of their position. Now, entertainers have taken on such a complex role that being good at their job is maybe 30% of why they exist. And calling these people stars was weirdly perfect, because those are pretty, but only from a distance. Increased access has revealed that a lot of these people are both stupid and hopelessly dependent on the attention of strangers. We do still envy big-name performers, but in general, we do not respect them. And frankly, we shouldn't. You can say that celebrities have always sucked, and that is perhaps true. Lewis didn't have the best reputation himself. But even if that ideal was a lie, it was a noble one. And if nothing else, it is beyond argument that our relationship with fame has gotten worse. In a society where roughly a third of the population is, you could say, LARPing as their favorite profession, Rupert Pupkin is the anti-hero we need, a shining example of how not to be an artist. There was a time in my life when I was a lot like Rupert, and this movie legitimately helped me avoid some of the pitfalls that come with being an egomaniac with creative aspirations, to the point that I've arguably went too far in the other direction. Lastly, we need to talk about the ending, where we actually see Pupkin's performance and the public response to it. If you're that worried about spoilers, video's over, but whatever. There were a few obvious ways to take this. Having Rupert eat shit would be cathartic for Jerry and also make sense, while a great performance would subvert expectations in an entertaining way. Instead, the filmmakers took a third option. Throughout the movie, we've gotten little hints that Pupkin is not totally without talent. The producer who rejects his tape compliments his timing, a random stagehand cracks up when reading his notes, and even when facing down a fully enraged Jerry, Rupert manages to spin his insults into a pretty clever misdirect. Pupkin is funny, just not as funny as he thinks he is. When samurai practice archery with their lord, the true victor is he who loses by the smallest margin. And in the same way, we get a routine which perfectly conveys how Rupert Pupkin sees himself, who he actually is, the life he's lived, his real potential, and how much of a gamble this insanity truly was. It takes a very nuanced, complex character and distills who they are with laser precision. And, in my opinion, it's easily De Niro's finest hour. And while Scorsese does leave quite a bit open to interpretation, let's just say that one way or another, Rupert does get what he wanted. Well, that's it. That's my favorite movie. I highly encourage you to go watch it. Appreciate the patience that everyone is treating me with. I am trying to be better. I've made a few mistakes in the last few months. Next video is Beastars. I promise we're getting back to anime. Thank you very much for watching. See you later. Follow me on Twitter.